I'm going to start this video with a hot take. A hot take some people are not going to like, but a hot take nonetheless. A motor is a motor is a motor is a motor. Most of the time. Today we're going to talk about motors, and specifically expensive motors like this GTSv4 from RCInpower. This is a $28 2207. This one's a 2050, somewhere in there, kV motor. One of my favorite motors. This one versus something like this. The recently released Vellox V3 2207 in, I believe, a 1950, so a little bit lower kV from TMotor. They actually just sent me these. These are newly released, and I am testing them out. And in order to test them out, I built a quad. This quad, to be exact, this is an AOS 5 with MR30 connectors, which makes it uniquely suited for starting with a motor like this and in the field swapping to a motor like this. And if you couldn't tell the difference between these two, the difference is $14 between these two motors. In other words, you can buy two of these Vellox V3s for the price of one of these GTSv4s. But do you really get that much more out of this GTSv4 for the cost? That's what we're here to talk about. So today, what I'm going to do is take my motors out on the GTSv4s on my motor test rig, and I'm going to field swap them to the cheaper motors. But before I do that, I'm going to play you two clips real quick. This is me flying one of these motors. You don't know which one. It's the exact same quad, the exact same props, and I'm not going to tell you which motor this is, but this is just a nice little blurb of me doing the flippies and the floppies like I usually do. And this is me on the other motor. Can you tell the difference? Which motor is which? I want you to go ahead and formulate that opinion. Which one is which? Which one is the $14 motor and which one is the $28 motor? It's going to come in handy down the road. Because before we get into my flight experience using them on this swappable test rig, we're actually going to take a look at both of these. Because when it comes down to it, there are differences. And I want to talk about where the money goes when you spend more money on a motor like this versus a motor like this. It's really hard to tell when I just hold them up, isn't it? That's one of the points. So let's dig into looking at both of these in a little bit more detail. And then let's talk about some of the expectations that I might have around it. And let's start by looking at this GTSv4 from RCInpower. This is the pink and silver color combo, which is one of my favorites. As you can see, we have a hollow prop shaft here. This is the standard prop shaft size. We have a little bit of prop grip here around the shaft. It's machined in. You can see where those pink insets are a little bit. That's the machined in portions. We have some pretty good standoffs for the outer ring. If we flip it over, you can see there's some pretty tight tolerances between the coil and magnets. If you look between the edge of where the coil ends and the magnet, it's pretty tight. Now, I'm not going to take the time to physically measure all that. This is not going to be about scientific evidence. If you want to talk scientifically about these motors, I highly recommend that you go watch Chris Rosser's motor test videos with a thrust stand, because that is objective scientific evidence that he has obtained with a thrust stand. Getting that evidence is only capable of being done with a thrust stand, and what we're going to talk about today is the real-world use case for this stuff, the subjective side of the data, how it actually feels to fly and what it means to own them. So I just wanted to point that out before you start asking me about the actual gap sizes or any of the other specifics about the measurements and output power numbers of these motors. You can see the coils in there across that gap. You can see the thickness of the magnets, all the good stuff in here, stuff we normally expect. There is a screw on the bottom with a ring underneath it to protect the bearing. We can kind of gauge the size of the bearing by looking at that hole right there. Nothing really to protect the motor wires, nothing special there. And it is definitely a unibell because we don't see any seams or separations in the bell itself in order to accomplish the top section here. And if you're wondering why I'm not quoting you anything about the kind of aluminum or the size of the bearings or the kind of shaft it has, that's because those things aren't actually listed on the product page at all. RCInpower actually doesn't do that very much. You can assume that it is probably using 7075 aluminum, which is high quality aluminum. You would really hope so for a $28 motor. I do not think it's a titanium shaft though. I still think we're in a steel shaft because it is ferrous. And we don't know about anything like a cushion ring at the top of the motor. There's nothing listed on the product sheet for that. So we're just going to make assumptions that it doesn't have it. I did not see any extra parts for it in the bag, so it likely doesn't have one on the top of the motor, because they give you extra parts like the bottom screw usually, and another little protector for the bearings. So if they didn't give me an extra ring for the top, it probably means it doesn't have a ring up there. And we're not going to get into tearing these apart because, again, I expect this to just be totally out of the box, how it feels, is it worth the money, and what's the difference? Now that we know that, let's take a look at the Vellox V3. And taking a look at this one, you can see there are some clear differences. It is clearly not a unibell. The top of the ring and the bottom of the ring are two different colors, and if you do it just right, you can get your fingernail in the crease. That is a split bell. Again, we have a hollow shaft, and up here we have some pretty good standoff for the outer ring. It seems to be pretty meaty. If I get my finger in here, I can feel the prop grip. They've actually diamond cut some pieces into this section here, and it feels like that would grip a prop really, really tightly. That's actually pretty nice. If we flip it over, pretty thick base. Again, we have the single screw retention instead of something like a C-clip. There's about the same size bearing. I'm going to bring this back in. If you look at them both, the bearing seems to be the same size, if I can get it at the same angle here. Yeah. So nothing real special there. I will say the thickness of this base is a little bit more than the RCInpower. When it gets down into the coils, they look a little bit darker, but that's just the enamel color. The actual copper windings are just about the same. If anything, the T-motors are just a hair thicker. And that actually makes a little bit of sense, because since it is a lower kV motor, that means that the windings are going to be a bit different. So it has a little more enamel, I think, and the coils are just a little bit thicker wire, but basically the same stator materials, nothing too crazy there. And this time, instead of no wire protection at all, they actually did put some epoxy adhesive in here. You can see it shining between the wire outlet and the base, so that you don't get any flex in here. If we look back at the GTSv4, it has some flex. You can totally flex this cable. Let's see if I can do it on the side here. You can move that cable up and down. I can't really do that on the Vellox V3 because of that epoxy. Now that epoxy is in reality not going to hold the wires on the motor if something goes catastrophic and you rip it off. It's going to go. It's going to crack. It's going to break off. It's not going to hold it there. It's not like it's a metal retention ring, which we do see on some motors. On my iFlight Xing Pro motors, they actually have the metal retention ring, which is kind of nice. But again, you notice how I didn't quote materials in this, because the listings for the kinds of materials aren't publicly available with the regular listings. Now, I could go to both of these manufacturers and ask, what materials did you use in this? But that's not something that you are going to be able to do as a consumer when you're shopping for this stuff. It's not in the listing. You just have to make the assumption that it doesn't exist. Now, I can say that being that this is a $14 motor and this is a $28 motor, there are likely differences in the materials construction. And we're going to get to that toward the end of this video. But now it's time to go see what it's like to actually fly them. Remember what you thought about the two clips that I played you earlier. Remember which one you thought was the cheap motor and which one was the more expensive motor? Let's take these out to the field and fly them back to back on the same quad with a motor swap in between and see what it's like. All right, so I'm out with my 5-inch motor test rig, and let's just put some packs on these expensive GTSv4 RCInpowers. See how they fly. And for this one, I'm not going to get too crazy. We're just going to see how these motors perform on this stock Betaflight tune on this AOS 5. A little bit of prop wash. Say hello to the quad. Let's do a full throttle pull. They get up and go. Performing pretty much like what I expect out of RCInpower motors. Always smooth and reliable. But you do spend extra for that. It does the flippies, it does the floppies. How about just some cruise? Let's see if it runs smooth. There's a little bit of wind, and like I said, this is stock Betaflight, so likely a little bit of bobble from that, but not too bad.
Got down to the grass a little bit there. I think my camera angle is a little bit off from what I'm used to, but yeah, these motors feel good. They feel good, they sound good. I could probably tune a little bit of the warble out of them. Here, I'm gonna get behind myself so you can hear them. I'm just gonna full throttle punch up. It'll get up and go. Well, let's just burn the pack out and have some fun. And then we're going to swap over to the cheap motors. I feel like an idiot. It's okay. I know what I like. I know what I like, and this is it. All right, that's good enough. It's 3 minutes. That's it. Let's swap motors. And now for the beauty of why I built this particular motor test rig the way I did, using MR30 connectors so that I could solderlessly sit here at a park bench and swap my motors for cheaper ones in case I felt like it. So time to swap these.
2 hours later.
All right, so other than props, some tape and zip ties, motors are swapped. Let's go rip these cheapies, see what the real difference is between this and super expensive. They sound like motors. They flippy and they floppy. So will they full pull? Yes, they will. They will go. You'd be really hard pressed to tell. I'm doing just completely blind like I did at the intro. You'd be really hard pressed to tell. It sounds nearly identical. And they feel nearly identical. The only way they don't feel identical is in the pocketbook. But we'll get to that in a second. Yeah, they fly. They get up and go. I think I'm going to come back and hover it a little bit. I think I hear one minor difference. I don't know if you'll be able to hear it. Okay. So I'm hovering the quad back behind me now. It's going to be really hard to hear. Really hard to hear. I can hear a little bit of a tick. I can hear some bearing tick in it. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just something the other ones didn't have. That's all. I have a lot of motors with bearing tick. Don't get me wrong. Even new out of the box, bearing tick is not an abnormal occurrence. All right, let's burn up the rest of this pack. And then we're gonna talk more about what actually makes the difference between budget motors like this and what I flew earlier.
And now that we're back from the field, the verdict is they felt the same. The only real difference was when I flew the GTSv4s, my wallet felt $60 lighter for having bought a set of them. And that really doesn't impact the flight performance. Maybe the amount of time I can stand up, but we're only talking a few grams, as American dollar bills don't weigh that much. And honestly, I use a credit card anyway, so yeah. Is it worth the extra 14 bucks? There is a place that money goes, though, and I do want to talk about that. But before we talk about that, I want to ask you if you got it right at the beginning. When I played the small clips, which one did you think, remember back to that, was the expensive one? Because I'm going to tell you now, the first clip was me flying the GTSv4s, the expensive one. The second one was me flying the cheaper Vellox V3s. If you couldn't tell the difference, then that tells you exactly how you should feel about buying these motors up to this point. Now, if you could tell the difference, congratulations. Either way, go down to the comments below and tell me if you got it right, if you got it wrong, what you actually thought the difference was between those flights. Just remember, I am a human being, and I tried to fly the same, even though it's impossible for me to fly similarly twice exactly in a row. It was on the same quad, though. It was on the motor test rig, so it was about as similar as I could get. But definitely go down and let me know if you got that right or not. Now, let's get real serious about what the actual difference is in these two motors, because the money goes somewhere. I promise you it does. And one of the biggest places that two motors like this may differ, more expensive and more budget-oriented, is in bearings. And if you notice during my flight footage, I talked about the bearing noise, because I could hear the bearing noise out of the Vellox V3, where I heard near none out of the GTSv4. And just to put that in perspective for you, these Vellox V3s are brand new. That was the first flight I'd ever had on them when the noise came about. The GTSv4s here have been through a lot of flights, so they are not new, and I didn't hear any bearing noise. But does bearing noise actually matter? Is it worth $14, and where does it come from? Essentially, the bearing noise is just the tolerances between the little balls inside the chase of the ball bearing and the chase. There's just a little bit less tolerance tightness in there, so they rattle a tad. It kind of sounds like aluminum cans in the back of your trunk when you're trying to pump that bass. You know what I'm talking about? You know what I'm talking about? And skipping straight past my high school days where I did commit those sound system atrocities with motor vehicles, does it actually matter to hear that noise? What does it mean? Yes, it does mean that the bearings will wear faster. But by faster, I don't necessarily mean that in a month you're going to be buying a new set of motors. That is not the case. I have a lot of motors that have bearing noise, that sound like, seriously, someone just got married and they're dragging a 12-pack of Bud Light behind the car. And they still fly just fine. Where it starts to matter is when the noise gets so bad and the shaft starts to wobble. And if you can't tighten this screw on the bottom enough to get the wobble out, then it becomes a problem because the balance gets inconsistent and you wear the bearings even faster. That does not seem to be the case with the Vellox V3. They are really well machined and well made. I think where they're saving money here, definitely one of the things has to be the bearings. Now, if you are a professional pilot, cinematographer, maybe you're doing real estate photography, and you absolutely cannot have that noise, then maybe the $28 is worth it to you, to just not have that noise. If you're going to have a quad that you don't plan on putting another set of motors on for 3 years, you just never crash and you never destroy them from physical abuse, maybe the $28 is worth it for you. If you just like the idea that this is a premium motor and it did really well in the scientific testing and that makes you happier with your quad and enjoy it more, maybe the $28 motor is for you. But you can absolutely get it done with this $14 Vellox V3. There's no reason that you cannot. Now, I did say there was one other place where they may be saving some money on these things, and that is in material quality. That's just the truth of it. There may be some differences in aluminum between these things. I expect this is 70-75 because it cost me so much money, but I can't tell which one is which, and you can't tell either just by looking at the product pages. But I do expect that there are some differences between these in material quality, and although the machining on the T-motor seems to be terrific, other budget motors don't have that same thing going on. So, if you are going to buy a budget motor, stick to something like the Vellox V3, something well-known. Don't buy random budget motors from random companies that don't make really nice high-end motors as well, because there's a good chance the machining quality and the build quality and the parts quality are only geared for budget. Someone like TMotor making a budget motor does mean that they have the machine capability, they have the knowledge, they have all of the facilities and the people to put a good motor together, and they know exactly where to save the money and where not to. That's the kind of thing you're looking for in a budget motor, and don't feel bad if a budget motor is for you. If an expensive motor is for you, don't feel bad either, because they can be fun, they can be great, they can be totally worth it. But don't feel like you have to. No matter what the scientific results say, you saw the flight footage, I felt the flights, and these two things perform near identically for half the price or twice the price. That's the end of the hot take. That's all I'm going to say about motors, because at the end of the day, sometimes a motor is a motor is a motor, no matter what the numbers say, as long as it is the right situation for you and you don't need something extra special out of it, or just feel like you want something premium to be happy with yourself. Because buying something nice is actually sometimes exactly what your mental health needs, and other times exactly what it doesn't need. So just don't make the choice based on that unless you absolutely want to, because you can fly a cheaper motor and enjoy it. It's totally fine. Now, because I have the motor test rig, I'm going to be doing this with a lot of other motors. I'm going to be comparing them between various different things. This was just the first one that I tried. If you have any motors that you'd like me to test, send me a link below. I will definitely ask the manufacturer if they don't mind me doing it, because I can't afford to buy a million motors. But if they would send me the motor at no cost, I will not ever accept money to get an opinion of it, and I will tell you that opinion honestly, because I couldn't sleep at night if I took money from vendors to tell you about their products. That would just kill me. But anyway, that's all I have for you. If you want to get a set of Vellox V3s, there's a link in the description below. It is not an affiliate link. There is no money involved in that at all. If you want a set of GTSv4s, there's also a link in the description below, because they are both great motors, and whichever way you go, you will be happy. That is what I'm trying to say here. And I could not do all of this without my patrons, so stay tuned to the very end for the patron shout-out. But until next time, stay greasy, and I'll catch you later. So these people right here, they make it all possible. But what do they make possible? They make possible these videos where Bot Grinder's name, you'll see it here in a second, is going to scroll across my face because his name on Patreon is so long. Come on, Bot. Why you gotta have such a long name on your Patreon, man? Why do you gotta make it so? Why do you gotta make it roll right over my face? Why are you gonna be like that, Bot? Come on. No, Bot Grinder's actually a really cool guy. Bot Grinder makes some good motors too. They're durable. Everything about Bot Grinder is geared toward durability. And if you haven't seen his smaller freestyle frame that God and he collaborated on, you should check that thing out. The Grinderino, man. Also, Bot Grinder, if you're watching, please send me a Grinderino so that I can build a Grinderino and show people what a Grinderino is and do a build series on Grinderino. Thank you.